Welcome, I'm Giulia.
And I am Marta.
And this is LateMode, a podcast in search of the zeitgeist. Through a series of conversations, we explore the fragmented and hyper-connected modes of our current times. Hello, welcome, and thanks for listening in. It's Giulia here, and for this episode, I will be walking with Noemi Bardas through the topic of empowerment, self-organization, and movement. I'm currently recording in Vlaardingen, a small city in the south of the Netherlands, the home of Vlaardingen Commons, a neighbourhood renovation project which takes place over 2 streets inhabited by a self-organized community of people who work together to materialize this project. Noemi, who's a facilitator in the community, will explain us what is a self-organized community, how does it relate to empowerment, and how body movement can empower ourselves. I arrived a few days ago in Vlaardingen and I spontaneously decided to record an episode here. We improvised the recording studio in one of the common spaces of the neighborhood, so bear with me. The audio is not perfect, you may hear kids playing in the background or a few noises, but we tried our best. Hi Noemi, and thank you for agreeing yesterday over breakfast to talk to me today. We just discovered that we could have a lot to talk about, so thank you and welcome. So maybe we should start by telling our listeners, who is Noemi?
So I'm Noemi, almost graduating. I guess that's a part of my identity at the moment. I am passionate about working with participatory processes and in that sense also with self-managing organizations and communities, which is also why I live in Vlaardingen here and also why I am working in this project.
Great, and maybe let's start with this question. What is actually a self-organized community, taking Vlaardingen as an example?
We are a group of people who live in the same neighborhood, in the same 2 streets, and want to make it a nice living space for ourselves. And the part about being self-organized means that we are managing together our living space. So we're deciding how do we want to work together here, what do we want to do with the spaces, how do we want to share responsibilities, and then how to do that. It's a whole other story.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role within this community and how you see it actually in practice because you live here.
Yeah, so it's a double relationship for me with the community. Because besides living here, I also do my graduation project here. I'm interested in working as a facilitator. So this is also what I'm doing here, trying to facilitate the community to self-organize, so to support the group to find its ways, or our ways, to work together. So if we are to manage this as a group, how do we do that? How do we decide things together? How do we solve conflicts? How do we share responsibilities? How do we make decisions? These kind of things. So I'm facilitating or guiding that process. So talking to people and most importantly, bringing people together to talk to each other.
And so how did you get here at the beginning? How did you find out about this community? Was it related to your study?
I was interested in communities for a while. And I always thought, when I'll be older, I'll live in like an eco-village or something. And then at some point I thought, what am I waiting for? It's not necessarily something to do when you're old, right?
Yeah.
And then it was also during the pandemic and the lockdown, and I was living on my own, and I thought, this is not how I should live. I do not like this. And then I started looking more into communities. On one hand, because of this personal need, because I wanted to live with other people, to have that kind of social support and that kind of connection. And on the other hand, in a more like professional sense, because I was interested in this kind of way of societal organization, and also in more as a political thing, right? That I was, or that I am very much for like participatory processes and giving the power to the people in a specific system. So, for example, the inhabitants in a neighborhood, or, you could also say like the students in a school, the people who work healthcare organization or something.
And what are some of the examples of activities that you do together?
For example, we have working days. Every 1.5 weeks, we come together to work together on things that are needed in the community. So, for example, we share gardens. So we have common gardens, and we come together to plant things, or now we're building a greenhouse. Another example is that we have meetings, things that are happening, projects that are going on, ideas that we have, things that need to change, how things are going, and so on.
Actually, when I was talking to you about the topic that our previous guest, Lynn, has left us to discuss today, which is empowerment, we thought that it was fitting perfectly with what you're studying, what you're interested in. Yeah, also, what do we mean by, empowering people through, for example, different organized communities in this case?
So how does this relate to empowerment? It very much does. It's right about empowering people to take ownership and responsibility and the power over the system that they're part of, right? It abolishes hierarchy, people outside of the system centralizing decision making or power over a bunch of other people who are actually more affected by decisions and have more knowledge and more expertise in the topic than the people who are taking the decisions sometimes. Sounds amazing and is not easy to implement in practice, but it's doable. Yeah. It's quite cool and it gives amazing results also.
I mean, I have been here in this community just for 3 days, and I have to say it feels pretty nice being here. It's a very, very welcoming place. Also seeing people, helping each other and sharing their interests, but also sometimes their personal problems and working towards the maintaining of a common goal, which is their living space. I think it's a great thing. Then I sort of think how do you see not expanding but branching out? Is it possible to have more of these participatory self-organizing systems?
It's definitely possible to expand this in other systems and on larger scales and so on. It's also being done a lot. Yeah, there are also other communities that work like this in other countries, so more like co-living communities. You can use this kind of model it's not really a model, but these kind of principles, let's say, in businesses, all kinds of other organizations.
And what would you say are the principles?
Yeah, that's a good question. What are the principles? Well, collaboration, so working together, people's autonomy and independency, and autonomy is respected and is trusted. Also, trust is a very important principle. There are more principles. Also, just well-being, I think, as a goal, it works more towards well-being, improving people's quality of life and so on, rather than it being more efficient or effective or productive or so, right?
And I can imagine also has a strong focus on the living environment. I mean, it should be the common thing to think about, that obviously the emphasis is on the environment, but often in cities, individuals are sort of living in a place, but they're somewhat disconnected from that place, even from their neighbors or what's like around them and what's going on. So I guess that would be what I observe from sort of an outsider.
That the community or the group is also more like rooted in the space that they're in. Yeah.
Does it always work out? I mean, I have experiences with working with groups of people, and I can only imagine that, sometimes there are disagreements or there are, opinions that are somewhat opposite to each other. How does this work in practice?
It depends on the group. Usually in self-organized communities, you would also have a way of dealing with conflict, but you decide on that together as a group how you want to organize that. It's not like, if you're self-organized, this is how you deal with conflict.
Yeah.
That would go against the whole idea. but yeah, there are definitely conflicts and tensions and so on. And there's an ideal goal of self-organization that guides people in this, but it definitely doesn't work out like that all the time. And also because it's something we're still learning how to do and figuring out, oh, is this self-organization? Or is it like this? Or how does this work, right? So adaptation and learning are also very important principles in it, that we're figuring out as we're going, oh, does this work for us? No, this doesn't work. What about this one?
Yeah. And I guess that's the beauty about the the sort of autonomous principle, because you have the space to try and test, and then you can also leave behind certain things. And obviously our red thread today is empowerment. And I remember we were talking yesterday about movement, and empowering the body through movement, that through empowering the body, it branches out into, empowering the community, and then empowering more people, and then eventually it's something, that spreads around. And I'm curious to know more. We didn't really get into details. We saved it for today. So tell me about it.
I find that how we relate to our own bodies is very much connected to how we relate to other people or to our environment at large. So, yeah, our natural environment as well, just the world in general. So I find it important to work on all these levels when we talk about principles like collaboration and autonomy and trust and these kind of things. I'm interested in how we can bring those also just in our own body, right? And how can we connect to ourselves, as well as to the rest of the world. And in that sense, I've been working a lot with movement practices. I think, there are a lot of ways to do this. There are a lot of ways, everybody has their own ways to connect to this, like, their true uncomfortable selves, right? Like, that for me, dance and movement and performing arts, but also mindfulness and body work and these kind of things have been ways of exploring that connection with oneself. And I'm also, as a facilitator, I'm interested in how I can bring this to others, how I can also guide them through this kind of process of connecting to themselves and connecting to their own bodies, and in that empowering themselves, and how this connection contributes to this larger movement of self-organization and autonomy and collaboration and care and so on a societal level.
And how does this work? I'm sure not everyone is familiar with it. I'm not so familiar with it.
Yeah, it works in many different ways. I'm still figuring out how to adapt it also to different contexts, because sometimes I also do just movement sessions, and they're usually on a certain theme, let's say. So, for example, I did a workshop recently around this topic of connection, and through different guided exercises. A meditation, but it can also be some kind of game with a partner. Movement can also be just breathing, right?
Sure.
But it can also be dancing, and it can also be more dynamic and really playful. And
you're exploring all these different types of movement, and also how to, propose it in different contexts with different people. How is it received?
Also very differently. It depends on the people that I'm working with, and I'm also trying to figure out how to adapt to these different contexts, right? Because everybody has a body, so everybody can work with that body, but how can I, as a facilitator, guide them in that? What are appropriate ways for each person? So some people, for example, are super comfortable with more meditative stuff, and some people are super comfortable with more like improvisational dancing, where you just play music and they just do whatever they want, and that's super fine.
Of course, we all know this feeling of not feeling comfortable within our own body, and also, yeah, how does that then affect like us being individual in a larger context, in a society, in a community, with our families, etc. And I think it's very important, but I also see it somewhat understated. And I think it's great what you're doing, because it's very focused on something that I don't think we take so seriously.
Yeah, what I associate with this, with what you're saying, is that we're not taking the signals of our body seriously, or we're not using that as a guiding principle for our decisions or for our actions, right? That we're very intellectual and analytical in taking decisions, or that's at least what I notice for myself also, right? That if I'm trying to decide on something, I think, okay, what are arguments for it and what are arguments against it, and how would this influence my future opportunities, and how, and it is a bit disembodied, right? And I'm also trying to figure out how can I take decisions based on like, okay, how does this feel for me in this moment, right? Because ultimately you can argue pro or against anything. Yeah. But it's very clear sometimes that you feel, no, this is not what I should be doing now. This, like, it seems right in my mind, but it really doesn't feel.
It's more like a sort of intuition that affects.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, people talk a lot about intuition, and I was really trying to understand, like, what does this word mean? What do we mean when we say intuition? So I'm also like trying to use my own words in it, let's say, because it has so many meanings, because it's so used, right?
I think it's always important to ask that question, how does this really make me feel? And sometimes that doesn't have a rational explanation. And that makes it also very hard to communicate it to other people, because I just feel that this is going to, be bad or not be right. And then, well, how do you know? Well, I don't know. I don't know how I know.
I find to give that legitimacy for yourself, to be like, no, I trust this. It doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to follow this.
Yeah. And that's really just empowering yourself with, like, yourself telling yourself, I am empowered to make these decisions. It's sort of equipped with, my body and my intellect that kind of work together, and that gives me, the right power to decide.
I trust what I'm feeling and what my whole being is telling me, right? Instead of trying to control the outcome by, calculating the results and so on.
Yeah.
But generally, we don't know. And it's interesting how to, from what I understood, that's also part of what you're exploring in the podcast, right? How to deal with this unknown and this complexity and this not knowing. How do you...
Yeah, and also the knowing that can be too much. I think that's a sort of other side of the spectrum. When you have so much information, news, and so many different scattered opinions, I feel this can also kind of block your kind of your ability to really stand by your day-to-day decisions and acts.
Yeah, and that way I find this connection to oneself and this being present in that and following what feeling is there to be quite comforting, I guess, or quite helpful.
I guess if you have like a strong sense of that you can be present within yourself, then you have this sort of safe space that is not dependent on any political situation, any, opinion, or I don't know, wherever you are, it's always like inside. And so you can kind of take that.
I think something I'm learning more about right now for myself is to pause and slow down and just stop and be still and silent with whatever is happening in that moment. So with myself, with my environment, whether it's a social environment or it's a natural environment, or just to stop and feel and not do all the time.
Sit in silence. I will practice that. Nice. I think I want to ask you actually if you want to add. We discussed already what does empowerment sort of mean to you. How are you exploring this topic? Is there anything you want to add on it?
The first thing that comes to mind is that it's about trusting in oneself, for example, in one's own feelings, trusting not that everything's gonna go all right, but trusting that we can adapt to that and learn from it. Yeah, trusting that a community knows what's best for itself, let's say, so that the people in a specific system know how they want to do things and what could work, and they're capable of doing that, and they don't need like centralized external control to function.
Well, that was beautiful. And I do believe that it is true. We don't need above power, to tell us what is good and what is bad and what we should do. But I do believe that we do need more trust in ourselves and more trust with one another, because I think that that's really the premises of what we have been talking about today. Instead of putting down rules, you lay down the foundation of trust, and in that moment, people, they don't necessarily need the rules because they're trusting that, the other would also act in the interest of both, like of themselves and of the other individual and of the larger community. So thank you for talking about it with us. And I also don't want to forget this time, because I almost did last time, pick a little ruin out of our conversation. You don't know who our next guest is going to be. Yeah, what would you like to hear them discussing?
I guess the topic I'm really interested in right now, and that also connects to the topics we talked about, is, connection.
Nice.
So I'm curious how that resonates with others as well, and what they understand by connection, what it means in their own world.
Looking forward to having a chat on it as well. I'm sure we will talk more about Vlaardingen and this community also on our website, and try to give more space to this project if people are interested in knowing more. And so thank you. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If you want to dive deeper into the show, don't forget to check the podcast description for extra resources, contact information, and a sign-up form for our newsletter. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, take care.